So I want to just kind of do a real quick recap of um, what is being talked about here. So if we go back to the our the worksheet here. So this is in our video gallery. We had it on number 70 through 78. All those videos were there. I think that they are still there. I'm not positively sure, but anyway, if you're watching the video, you already have them. Okay. So you can actually go back to this podcast here and review this with your families. But they talked about earthquakes. Obviously, it's an earthquake in the heartland. They talked about thunder, the roar. It was like cannons going off. It was just a horrendous sound from the earth. They talked about strange gases or vapors with a sulfurous smell to them. Sulfur smell typically is from methane gas. Okay. And I'm going to talk about that in just a little bit. They talked about having flashing lights. That's the piezoelectricity. They've actually observed this, and it's actually been filmed now, sometimes even associated with volcanic eruptions. They found these earthquake lights, they call them, flashing lights. There's large fissures and cracks in the ground. Buildings were swallowed up in the fissures. It talks about sand blows up through the face of the earth, up to 15, 20 feet deep. This 30-foot high wall of water from the Mississippi rushing upstream, damming the river and causing it to go upstream, causing massive flooding. Cities were flooded. The familiar landscape, they said, were so dramatically affected, it looked like a war zone, he said. Okay. And they got 3,000 square miles of land that just subsided. And there were lakes that were formed in just hours because of the size of the rivers and the amount of water coming down many of the tributaries of the Mississippi River. It can fill an area really quickly with water. Now, if we go up from that, I'm going to talk just a little bit about the earthquake America forgot in this book. And these are just some fascinating things. So when I first found the book here, okay, I actually I just opened it up. I was kind of just interested in what it was going to say and so forth and what it was about. And I remember I was just flipping through it, and it has a lot of stuff. I've got a lot of notes in here. Snakes coming out in huge numbers before the earthquake happening. Animals suddenly went silent. Some dogs would be barking, and then they just stop. They talked about lakes formed in 10 miles by 4 miles lake. This is called Big Lake on the Arkansas-Missouri state line near Blytheville and Leachville. And just a lot of other information. New swamps were formed and so forth. But I got back here to page 237. And it's going through a lot of other things like friction, geothermal energy, warm water, night lights were being talked about. And these are all historically, documented stuff. But when I got to this one and I looked at this, I started reading this. And this is what I thought was just absolutely fascinating. They called earthquake smog. Now, how many of you have heard of earthquake smog before? I hadn't, and I've done a lot of research involving earthquakes with the universal model. So I was intrigued by the name earthquake smog in this little subchapter here. And that's what it said. As I read this first about 4 or 5 paragraphs, and I immediately closed the book, walked up and paid for the book because I knew this was critically important. Listen to these firsthand accounts of people who actually were there in 1811, 1812, and actually observed and felt and were part of and experienced these earthquakes. It says, during the duration of the disturbances and throughout the New Madrid region, people reported the darkening of the skies following the largest shocks. Clear nights became overcast. Clear days became dark and gloomy. Eliza Bryan described her family's experience on December the 16th when the first shock struck. Now get this. Quote, my ma tried to light the lamps, but the darkness was so dense they didn't help at all. Apparently, I'm not sure if it's clear whether she was not able to light the lamps. It sounds like she did get the lamps lit, but the light didn't go anywhere because of the denseness that they're talking about. And she also spoke of, quote, the awful darkness of the atmosphere during some of the daylight shocks. Now, Godfrey Lesueur said that following the severest shocks, quote, a dense black cloud of vapor overshadowed the land, unquote. Brothers and sisters, that's almost a direct quote right out of the Book of Mormon, but instead of out of this individual's personal journal that happened to be there in 1811, 1812. Another resident of New Madrid said that when a large shock occurred, quote, the air would be clear at first, but in 5 minutes would become very black, and this darkness returned at each successive shock. So every time there was a shock that happened. And if you were listening closely, how many earthquakes are we talking about? This book is actually talking about 2,000 earthquakes over a 5-month period. If you just divide that out by 5 months and 2,000 earthquakes, it works out to about 17 earthquakes a day on an average. They said the ground almost never stopped moving. It was almost continually in motion, with the great big ones happening in the beginning, and other ones, these were, originally they talked about these being like an 8.0 magnitude. They've kind of downgraded those. They said, well, because there was no seismographs, so they don't know exactly how big these quakes were. But based on the damage that they did and how far they were felt, they're assuming somewhere between a 7.4 to an 8.2 or 3 for the biggest shock. So we're talking about some massive earthquakes. And we're going to talk about just in a second, that these quakes in this New Madrid seismic zone is very active, and it tends to go off about every 200 years on an average. So that's interesting when you consider 1811, 1812, and we're now at 2024. So we're actually a little overdue from the average of when these things would happen. Listen to this next account here. According to the recollection of Ben Cartier, who was at Little Prairie when the earthquakes began, he said, the sky changed color with one of the shocks. We felt a little earthquake, he said, and the sky turned green, and then it shook really hard, unquote. A minister living near Cape Girardeau, now get this, reported that from December the 16th until December the 17th, so how many days is that? The 16th, 17th, 18th, right? And the 19th. So it's either 3 or 4 days. It's like basically 3 days. He said, quote, the sun, moon, and stars were concealed by a mist and fog which dropped like a heavy dew, unquote. Brothers and sisters, that is directly out of the Book of Mormon. And it said right here, it says the earth was carried, let's see. It talks about the sun, moon, and stars were hidden from view in the Book of Mormon. Wow. Another man at Herculaneum, I think it is. I can't remember how they pronounce that. Sorry about that if you're from there. More than 100 miles up the river from New Madrid, said that following the shock, quote, the air was filled with smoke or fog, so that a boat could not be seen at 20 paces, nor a house at 50 feet away. The air did not clear until the middle of the day after the shocks that morning. Another example of such reports have been given elsewhere in this book, but this is one of the famous person who actually experienced this, and that's the naturalist John James Audubon that started the Audubon Society. He also observed what may have been the same phenomena from a distance. As told in the previous chapter, Audubon was on a bluff near present-day Hickman, Kentucky, on the morning of January 23rd of 1812, when one of the largest of the New Madrid earthquakes hit. At this location, it would have been about 18 miles due east of New Madrid, about 25 miles from the epicenter between Point Pleasant and Little Prairie, Missouri. The bluffs are 150 to 200 feet above the river at that location, and the visibility on a clear day is at least 40 miles. Audubon was looking toward the west, in the direction of New Madrid and Point Pleasant at the time, and he wrote this in his journals. His journals, if you had a copy of his journals right now, you'd be very rich, okay, because they are priceless. He wrote, I saw a sudden and strange darkness rising from the western horizon and heard what I imagined to be the distant rumbling of a violent tornado. It wasn't until a few seconds later that seismic waves traveled to where he and his horse were standing and the ground began to shake. Is it possible that what Audubon saw in the distance was the same fog, mist, or smoke described by others? Scientists do not doubt this phenomenon to have been real, but are not in agreement as to what is its cause. Whew. So it talked about warm water coming up through the cracks of the earth. There's actually accounts in this book of a guy who was riding his horse just out through an open field. All of a sudden, a huge crack opened up, and he and his horse fell into the crack about 20 feet down. The horse killed the horse. The guy basically was afraid the quaking was continuing on, and he was afraid it was going to close back up and squash him like a bug. So he tried to get out, but it was 20 feet above his head, and so he actually had to hike. He figured about a mile he had to hike along the bottom of this crevasse until he could get up high enough he could grab some roots of a tree that were sticking out and pull himself up and flop out on top of what before was just a flat surface field. The effects of this were absolutely astounding in this whole area. Okay, so there's some of the quotes here that I just was talking about here. I just read them from the book, but you can see the quotes there. And then also, so let's just go really quickly, the observations in the Book of Mormon. So I'm going to start checking these things off on the things in the Book of Mormon. So we talked about a storm. Yep, that was definitely a storm. It's actually in storm season in April in the heartland of America. So is it possible that it could have been a storm at the same time as the earthquakes? And the answer is that it's likely, actually, that would have been happening. Now, of course, we know what a tempest basically is, and which is part of the storm. We talked about thunder, which is a result of lightning. Shaking the whole earth was clearly seen. They talked about lightning was seen. Cities burned. It didn't talk about any cities being burned in 1811, 1812. They were mostly sunk and buried and covered up and so forth. But that's number 7. Cities sunk in the earth. Number 8, earth carried up on a city. Isn't that an excellent description of a sand blow coming up and then just covering areas that were being occupied at the time? Clearly, that's talking about that. Number 9, the whole face of the land changed. Yes, in fact, he says it was like a war zone, I think is what they said. Okay. Whirlwinds. Clearly, it could be whirlwinds at the same time because this is, in fact, in April and May, our Tornado Alley is when it's at its most active. So there clearly would have been whirlwinds at the same time. And by the way, volcanoes don't create whirlwinds that are strong enough to actually carry people away, as it's described in the Book of Mormon. Quaking of the whole earth. Yeah, we have that. Highways broken up. Yep, any highways would have been destroyed by these cracks and the heaving of the earth all over the place. Level land was spoiled. Yes, smooth places became rough. Yeah, absolutely. Cities sunk. Yeah, we had 3,000 square miles of land that just sank, 10 feet down into the earth, and then was covered up. So water and sand were covering up these cities. The face of the whole earth was deformed. Rocks rent in twain, clearly seams and cracks upon the earth. Yes, thick darkness upon the face of the land. That was interesting that they talked not just about being dark, like the dark at night, but it was thick darkness. There was something about the vapor and the mist that was unique to this experience. And of course, that's what we have in number 20, the vapor of darkness. They could not build a fire. They didn't say anything about that in the films. No sun, moon, or stars. That was almost a direct quote. The mist of darkness, number 23. 3 days of darkness actually was, in fact, observed. Can you imagine? I was wondering, how would we ever, how can an earthquake cause 3 days of darkness? But here it is, actually observed in 1811, 1812. Then there's cities covered with earth. Of course, yes, indeed. Cities buried up in the depths of the earth. Yep. Water came up out of the earth. Absolutely. And hills and valleys in place of cities. So let's see. If I add those up, there's 28 total. There's 2 of them that have not been addressed yet. And that's cities being burned and could not build a fire. So we have 26 out of 28 of the observations made in the Book of Mormon were actually observed in 1811 and 1812. That's pretty good. Oh, but wait a minute. Cities being burned. Let's address that. They did talk about this sulfurous smell. Now, I have to admit, I've been up to Yellowstone National Park, the hot pots and things that are there, and they're constantly off-gassing, and it does have this sulfurous smell. And I just wanted to verify, so I actually took one of those long-handled little fire starters, little lighters, and kind of stood back and kind of put it over and where the gases were escaping from this fumarole, and hit it, and it went out. In fact, I couldn't even keep it going because the gases coming out of the mud pots and the hot pots up there were such that it actually would put the fire out. Even though it's had the butane and so forth, it wouldn't keep going. And then I did a little bit of research, and I found out actually the reason why is because there's two kinds of gases underneath the Mississippi River Valley. If you have a massive earthquake and it splits open, there's 3,000 feet of decomposing material down underneath there, and that material is going to be there's going to be gases and stuff that are trapped down in there. And as those gases are released and come up on the surface, some of it may be this sulfur type gas, which is interesting because it's not flammable. It's not a flammable gas. But on the other hand, depending on what it is that's down there decomposing, it might be methane gas, and methane gas would be highly flammable. So basically, if you were up there and you were having your buffalo burgers, okay, on your campfire, you had a fire going, and all of a sudden the earth belched out a massive amount of methane gas, it could cause a huge conflagration. It wouldn't be an explosion because there's nothing compressing it down, but it would be this massive just fireball that would be going along. And of course, that is actually described in detail, or in some detail, several cities that were burned with fire. I mean, burning with fire was a major element of the Book of Mormon description of these things. So if cities being burned, clearly that could happen. But it's also interesting. They said that they had difficulty of respiration. Well, these gases, especially the sulfurous type gases, as they come up out of the earth, they're heavier than air, and they would settle down on the surface of the ground. And when they do, it displaces the amount of oxygen that is there. And so you have, I think it's at 16%, you have to have 16% oxygen in the air to support combustion. Fire or combustion can't even happen if you go below 16% oxygen. And there's typically, I think, about 21% oxygen in the air in general. So you only have to reduce it by about 5 or 6% of the oxygen in the atmospheric air, and there wouldn't be enough there to support a fire. But interestingly enough, it didn't say in the Book of Mormon that people died as a result of not being able to breathe. They just couldn't build a fire, even with their fine and best dry wood. And let me tell you, these Nephites, they were not novice fire builders. I'm sure that they knew how to build a fire, much better than probably any of us do, because their lives depended on their ability to build a fire. But they said they couldn't do it even with their dry wood. If you have dry wood, why can you not build a fire? I couldn't think of any good reason until I realized that it was probably because of the gases that are being expelled from the earth, coming up and then dropping down and floating out over the surface of the earth, and displacing the oxygen would make it so much that they wouldn't be able to build a fire, but they'd still be able to breathe, because humans can live down to about 10%. You start getting woozy and start having blackouts and so forth if you get down below 10% oxygen in the air, but you would actually live through it, but you couldn't build a fire. So the description in the Book of Mormon is just fascinating, because these are things that most people have never heard of. And how would Joseph Smith possibly know this stuff? That's one of the questions that I had to bring up is, if Joseph Smith was just writing this stuff up and just writing, the destructions of stuff that he was aware of and familiar with, many of these things he would have no experience with. But it is interesting, though, that this happened 1811, 1812. I'm going to finish up with this here in just a couple minutes, and that is that it seems as if when the covenant people who are on this covenant land of God, the United States, basically, from Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden, when those people became sufficiently wicked and fell into apostasy, they were destroyed by the flood. Then you have the Jaredites come, and they were destroyed by turning on each other and having a civil war, essentially, and all the way down to the one guy. The Nephites come. Interestingly enough, their civilization is brought to an end by civil war, but they have this experience with Christ. It's interesting to consider that when Adam and Eve were in the Garden of Eden, Christ came to them. Obviously, the Father and the Son both were there and had a couple, several visits with Adam and Eve. Then you have basically the Nephites. Right before Christ comes, there's a massive event that causes all this calamitous destruction. and it was just literally right before Christ comes. And then when Christ came again to the Americas, basically to America, I should say, was when he went with the first vision with Joseph Smith in 1820. So this 1811, 1812 earthquake sequence literally heralded, or it was just a few years before Christ came again to America in the first vision. And I guess I'd have to, wonder if there might be another massive New Madrid event that heralds the coming of Christ again for the final time, in his magnificent and glorious second coming. I think the answer to that is a highly probable situation. But let's go to finish up so we have cities being burned with fire. Clearly that could happen. Number 21, they could not build a fire. And that's explained by this sulfur dioxide gas that comes up out of the air or out of the ground and then settles on the surface and basically reduces the amount of oxygen so that you can't even have a fire. So if I have this right, brothers and sisters, that's 28 observations in the Book of Mormon. It's 28 for 28. That's 100%. Every single observation that was made in the Book of Mormon by the prophet Nephi was actually observed in 1811, 1812 on the New Madrid seismic zone. So that brings us to one final question. Was there such an event that happened around the time of Christ? We can look at, from a geology standpoint. Now, this is the geology of the Book of Mormon in Central America. But from a geology standpoint in the heartland of America, is there any evidence for such an event? And that I'm going to get to in just a little bit. I'm going to show you a few images here so you can kind of see some of the destruction that was happening here. But I think you're going to find this is just absolutely fascinating material here. So let's go back to this our slide deck here. Okay. So we have, as you can see in this image here, you have the Ohio River Valley, the red zone going up that direction. Now, this is a 6.8 magnitude earthquake in 1895 that happened. This is the area that was impacted by the earthquake. Conversely, back in 1994, there's an earthquake down there in California. There's a magnitude 6.7, so very similar, but look how small it is in California. It's because California is in a zone where it's highly rocky. It's a lot of, there's the San Andreas Mountains and so forth. There's mountains. The Rocky Mountains are all down through the western part of the United States. But out here in the eastern part of the United States, in the Midwest, that's relatively flat. I mean, you can see where Kentucky and West Virginia and Tennessee, that's where the Great Smoky Mountains are located. And so that's the reason why it doesn't tenuate past those mountains. It basically follows the river valleys, which I think is just fascinating because in the Book of Mormon heartland model, Tennessee is the land of Nephi. Up into Illinois and Iowa is the land of Zarahemla. And Ohio is the land of Bountiful. So no matter where the Nephites were located in their primary areas, this would have affected them. Now, I do want to address another thing, and that is that people say, well, we'll never know the geography of the Book of Mormon because everything was just jumbled up at the time of Christ's death, right? The destruction is talked about. Interestingly enough, though, it wasn't a worldwide phenomena as far as the entire destruction phase. But there was about 5 or 6 different histories of people who lived in areas where if there was a worldwide phenomenon like that, the tsunamis in the oceans would have wiped those civilizations off the map. The Greeks and others that were, that would have been in the different civilizations, like in Egypt and so forth. There's no description or there's no account of any kind of destruction except for the one that happened around Jerusalem. It talked about there was a storm that came up and there was an earthquake and the veil of the temple in Jerusalem was rent in twain. It doesn't say that Jerusalem was destroyed. In fact, we know it wasn't destroyed. There's no destruction account over there that even compares with what's going on over here in America. This is a massive destruction that is tailor-made for those Nephites who had lost their grip on the iron rod and had become apostates, become going into apostasy. I think it's just fascinating that is the case. There's no other civilizations that talk about a massive changing of the earth on all of these different things. Now, when it says that shook the whole earth as they knew it. So that was basically my understanding is that they were talking about that. Okay, let's go through a couple of these things. So this is New Madrid, Missouri. This is they're in New Madrid and talking about the earthquake there. They have a huge levee now. It's about a 35-foot levee along the riverbank. That actually this road on the left-hand side is going along that levee, and then the river is on the right-hand side. These are some of the places where in 1811, 1812, you can see these are black and whites that were taken way back, and they actually were part of the David Stewart and Ray Knox collection of images. But the trees, the whole land was upheaved here, and so the trees were actually going at an angle, and then over the course of time, they straightened themselves out and kind of went back into being more vertical. But you can see the bases of the trees were all angled because of the land being heaved up here. You can see some of the same kind of thing here with this guy stand here. There's a tree there. Other trees are kind of bent in the background there, and this is showing an area where it cracked, and this big tree is sitting down below, and then there was a fault right along there, and then the trees behind are on an upper portion, and that's where a fault was actually created. That tree dropped down about it looks like about 3 or 4 feet, about the height of the horse's belly. This is some of the land and some of the ponds and so forth that were going on after the earthquakes happened. This is, of course, long after. This is back in the early 1900s. Some of the trees and how the subsidence caused the soil and so forth to erode back out from underneath this as that area was dropped down. This is a view from New Madrid across the Mississippi River. And you can see how far that is. It's probably about 1.5 miles, maybe, or between 1 mile and 1.5 miles wide at that point. And the city of New Madrid is literally, the original city of New Madrid is literally under the water in this photograph, just right off the shore, probably about 300 or 400 feet off the shore, is where some of the original township of New Madrid was located. This is looking straight across that area. This is right on the big horseshoe bend of the river, which is right at the top of it. And this, brothers and sisters, when we took our tour out, this is Reelfoot Lake. This is the area where 3,000 square miles literally dropped by about, in this particular case, about 4 feet. And how do they know that it dropped? Because the trees out there, the bald cypress, they grow these kind of an interesting root structure right at the water surface. And a lot of these trees that were old enough to be back in those time frames had a root ball basically at the bottom, and then they call them what they call them, knees, I think they call them. Anyway, and then when this area subsided and the Mississippi River flowed into it, the new lake level caused the tree to grow a new set of those knees. It's about 3 or 4 feet above the old ones. So we know that those trees were there, and we know that the land subsided by about 3 or 4 feet in this area. But look at the size of that lake. This is not just a pond. This is a pretty good-sized lake. So when we're out there with our tour, we're taking a look at that. This is kind of looking out towards I think this is to the west from where that pier is located. You can see the bald cypress there. This is looking now a little bit further to the north and to the west. This is looking out to the east. You can see how far that is before you get. I mean, this is not your small. This is a small lake. This would be described here as cities being buried, or cities buried in the depths of the earth, and the water came up out of the earth. It's talked about there. There's one that talked about cities being sunk. So this lake is not very deep. It's probably about 25 feet deep at the deepest point of it here. But if you have if you're Native American people and you have your Hopewell homes, they're typically about 7 to 8 feet tall, maybe 10. So this is you know twice that over the top of your house. So that's clearly would be a major destruction. So there's a little bit of our tour group out there on the pier taking a look at the Reelfoot Lake. It's hard to see it from the surface, so this is a couple of images from an airplane that were taken by I think it was David Stewart. So you kind of get an idea. This is just some parts of it. It goes on for miles. There's another little part of it, and there's another shot of that. Now this was back. A lot of these trees have now kind of disintegrated, and they've actually taken a lot of them out so that boats can go in there without poking holes in their hulls and stuff. So anyway, so that gives you an idea of just the sheer size of this lake that formed again in just hours. These are sand blows. You can see the sand on the surface, even after 150 years, and now it's been over 200 years. There's some areas where you can't hardly even grow a decent crop of cotton or anything because there's so much sand it doesn't have enough nutrients for the plants. Give you an idea of how big these are. Take a look at this image, and you'll see the silos. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 silos on the left-hand side, and then you see the big bright spot in the middle. That's a single sand blow, and then you can see the size of the homes and so forth. So you get an idea of the sand blow there. Now that gives you an idea of the size of a single sand blow, but this is showing a whole section of land out here. And you can see how the sand kind of flowed along on the surface and deposited the sand all over the surface of it. That's a home down in the lower right-hand side. So it gives you an idea of the size of this. And you think that's pretty big, but then when you look at this from a little bit bigger perspective, that whole region is a huge sand blow. You see that sand has been running across the surface of this and burying this whole area in sand. This one shows a lot of individual sand blows. You see every one of those light spaces there is a place where there was a separate sand blow. And if you take a look at the subdivision in the school there, it's kind of fascinating because it's all green. They actually had to truck in topsoil from other places so they could have green lawns, because otherwise the sand is so deep and so thick that they can't really even support a lawn. So you get an idea of how much sand literally belched up out of the surface of the earth. You can see, again, more sand blows from the air. It's one thing to see it from the air here, or like here. You can see it clear out into the distance. You see further sand blows going on. Again, these are old photos. These were actually from slides that they had taken way back when they first started their research. And you get an idea of this. Now, if you take a look at the radial, it's kind of, you can see kind of a rounding of the up in the left-hand side. You see that town in the background there, okay? But you see these kind of radial lines, so that the sand blows came out. They kind of like there was an expulsion of the sand that would flow out onto the surface and then kind of stay there, and then another one would happen. It'd come out and flow out again from these sand blows. This is from an airplane. This next one is by satellite. So this is showing how extensive. I mean, this has probably about 4 or 5 square miles, maybe more than that. That's point bar deposits. So you can see the radial lines, how the sand was deposited all over the entire surface of this whole region out here. So you get an idea of that. Now, this is interesting because this is you can see where this is located. You see where St. Louis is over here on the left, and Louisville over here on the right, Lexington, Kentucky there on the far right. And then you see the Ohio River coming down. It goes past the Man Hopewell site, which is an awesome place to go. They have a great museum and things there, and visitor center right there on the Ohio River. And then the Ohio River comes down from the upper right to the lower left and connects in with the Mississippi River, which is coming down from St. Louis. And so the two of those meet right there. And New Madrid is after those two meet and flows down below. You see the very first really big horseshoe bend right at the bottom left-hand side of the image here is where New Madrid is, at the top of that horseshoe. So here it shows you a little bit. There's Cape Girardeau. That's where the John James Audubon was. He was at Cape Girardeau looking when these earthquakes happened and saw the darkness. And he was looking west. So you get an idea of from the epicenter. The epicenter was almost south of him, but yet he was looking west and saw that all going dark or black. Okay, this is getting a little bit closer to Cape Girardeau, and you can see just the top part of the New Madrid is right there. Some of the towns here are called Sykeston and Dexter and Poplar Bluff. But one thing I want to point out is if you take a look on the left-hand side of this image, you see how these are satellite images, and basically it's kind of green. But notice how around Sykeston and Dexter, and just kind of to the east of Poplar Bluff, the ground actually goes from green to gray, or kind of a brownish color. That's where those sand blows were primarily located. Now, if we continue on from a little bit different perspective here, New Madrid is, you see Crothersville and Seneth and Rector, but you see the sand blows coming clear out here to the south and west of the big horseshoe that is New Madrid. Okay, there's Blytheville. We actually stay there sometimes. But to get an idea here, just the tortured landscape up here by Caruth and Seneth, it's just, they can't even hardly grow crops still there. It's so bad. There's New Madrid. It's over there on the kind of on the left hand of the horseshoe there. The current city of New Madrid is actually right at the top of the horseshoe bend. And you can see, again, just the colors here. There's New Madrid, and this one actually shows Reelfoot Lake, so you get an idea of where that is. So from New Madrid, which is at the actual top of the horseshoe, the Reelfoot Lake that formed in just a few hours was right there next to that. There's also a Hopewell burial mound right in the city of New Madrid, right next to the high school. If you go out there, you go out to the high school, and it's right there. Okay, you can actually go and check it out. So we know that the Hopewell were all through this whole area here. And you got Reelfoot Lake, just give you an idea of how big it is. There's Blue Basin, and then other of the grassy areas and so forth, and other parts of the upper Blue Basin and Reelfoot Lake. So there's the whole region there. That's the 3,000 miles that just subsided into the ground or into the earth. Just another shot there, again showing the difference in colors. Just showing you the tortured landscape here, even 200 years later, it's still, you can see the effects of the 1811, 1812 sequence of earthquakes that blew through this area and left these massive deposits of sand everywhere in this whole region. This is these are the big circular irrigation systems that are out there. So they're trying to get this to develop a soil enough so they can actually farm it. And it's starting to get there now, but it's been almost 200 years. Just look at the different areas here, just how amazing that is. All right, so there's your general overall view of the Reelfoot Lake and New Madrid, and the epicenter of this was just south of New Madrid, down in that horseshoe area, essentially. Even to this day, there's still effects of this happening from the big cracks and so forth that made the area unstable. It's also a very active zone today. Even the New Madrid seismic zone, this was from about 10 years ago or so. When I first did this research, they're showing some of the epicenters of earthquakes. That earthquake zone is still very active. In fact, I think it was just last week, they had a series of 7 earthquakes in a row, which was a little bit uncommon. They're not big earthquakes typically. They're like 2 and 3. Usually a 2 is enough that you can feel it. A 3, you definitely would feel it. But they were mostly in the 2 and 3 range. And again, it's very active. Some places like St. Louis, they have spent literally, tens of millions of dollars doing retrofitting of bridges, trying to earthquake seismically upgrade them so that they don't fall down. If there was a similar earthquake that happened today, it's like the video said. I mean, it'd be just devastating. It would sever, natural gas lines and transportation corridors. It would cause havoc if the Lord wanted to bring the United States to its knees in a quick second. All he'd have to do is have another similar event on the New Madrid seismic zone, and it would basically shut down the United States economically for potentially years, if this were to happen again. But let's get back to the final thing here. So really quickly, so this Martisha Tuttle, the USGS geoseismologist, that was she did a bunch of research. She did actual digs where they actually dug down and they found these sand blows, and they got dating and so forth of the artifacts and things. And this is what they found. The first generation of this happened. Said 2 sets of compound sand blows separated by a base of late Archaic mound. Radiocarbon dates indicate they formed about 2350 BC. Plus or minus 200 years. So that's about in the time frame of really, I mean, that's almost Jaredite time frame. Then you have second generation sand blows. Sand blow with soil development that buries the Native American occupation horizon. That's where the Hopewell Mound Builder people were living on the surface of the ground. It buried them. Radiocarbon dating and artifact analysis. The artifacts were all Hopewell Mound Builder artifacts. Indicates it formed around 300 AD plus or minus 200 years. Now, wait a minute, 300 AD, but if you minus 200 years, so they're given about a 400-year limit, 200 years this way, 200 years that way. There's really no good way to know if the material that they might be radiocarbon dating was actually, from that time frame. But what we absolutely know is that the mound builder artifacts were a Hopewell. And we know the Hopewell were here. That's part of the reason why they said about around, they know they were here, between about the time of Christ and 300 AD. So they put it out there. The bottom line is that this is within just a few years of what the Book of Mormon says when this actually happened, around the time of Christ's death. So I personally believe that the dating here of the artifacts is correct. The dating here, as far as that, is close enough that we could fudge it just a little bit, and it would be right in that time frame. If that's the case, I think we just isolated the actual event that is being described in the Book of Mormon that really did in fact happen. That is astounding. I had no idea that the geologists here in North America, non-members of the church, would find the evidence to actually would at least have the propensity of evidence to support the Book of Mormon claim of this massive event that happened. And now we actually can see it in the ground, in the hard archaeology. We see this actually showing up. This is, for example, the Burkett sand blow that formed in 300 AD, plus or minus 200 years, interpreted to be the result of a new matter earthquake on the basis of its large size and the age similarity with 2 other sand blows in Tawasagi and to the south. So there was other sand blows that have been excavated, that have been geologically looked at, and they're all in that same time frame, which basically means this was a regional event. This happened just like it did in 1811 and 1812. They're saying it's very similar in size to the earthquake that happened in 1811 and 1812. There's sand dikes and sand blows. They said the sand blows that formed in 1811 and 1812 are 20 to 140 centimeters thick and composed of depositional units. The second generation 300 AD sand blows at Burkett is 30 centimeters thick. At Burkett, similar to the sand blows that formed in the 900 AD analysis at nearby sites. And given its size, the second generation sand blow around the time of Christ may have formed as a result of a very large New Madrid earthquake. If so, there should be other sand blows of this age. Either they have not been found and dated, or the age of the sand blow at Burkett has been misinterpreted. So in other words, they're also questioning the dating aspect of this. But the bottom line is that it's there. So, brothers and sisters, let's just kind of wrap it up here. The Book of Mormon talks about, in its history, it describes a great storm and darkness, 3 days, the great and terrible tempest and sharp lightnings, and it shook the whole earth, and the city sank in the depths of the sea, and all these different things. 28 very specific observations made by the prophet Nephi and put into the Book of Mormon. And then we have the New Madrid event, which has 28 out of the 28 observations were observed. We have not only did the everything match up from an evidence standpoint, we also have a similar event that happened near the time of Christ, which is what the Book of Mormon has said that it was. So to finish it up here, basically we've got, so this is a couple of pages from the book. This is from this book, Exploring the Book of Mormon, America's Heartland. Again, this is on pages, let's see, 188, 189, and 190. If you have this book, which is unfortunately, I apologize. This book has been out of print now for about 2.5 years. I've been needed to do a serious update on with so many additional evidences and informations from when this book was originally put out here, which was I think in what was it? It was 2012, I think it was. Anyway, I'll look up real quick. I don't remember. Yeah, let's see. The fifth printing was on 2013, but the original printing was in 2011. All right, and then, but if you also have the annotated Book of Mormon, this is all in here. So if you've been looking at this as you're going through your Come Follow Me, then you would have already known about some of these things here on page 395, 396, and 397, which actually talks about all that. And cities being burned with fire talked about that, and all this, everything is in there. Okay, so that is the another page from that book. You can take a look at that if you want to read that. This is talking about the 3,000 square miles in the Reelfoot Lake. I've got better photos now of that. And so we invite you. I hope that this is as exciting to you as it is to me, because it just blows my mind. How in the world would you ever believe that a series of earthquakes could cause every single destruction that is described in the Book of Mormon? And guess what, folks? No volcanoes. Volcanoes are not only are they not necessary, they're never mentioned in the Book of Mormon. So I hate to to bring it up here, but Jerry Grover he's done a phenomenal job of the geography, the geology down in Central America, but he didn't apparently consider the heartland as a possible alternative to the destruction. He just assumes that it was volcanic in nature, and that's why you end up completely off the track and trying to say that like John Sorensen did, that the Book of Mormon could not have happened in North America because there's no volcanoes. It's true that there's no volcanoes. What's not true is that it couldn't have happened in North America. I just want you to know that as I've done this research from every aspect, whether it's genetics, linguistics, anthropology, whether it's plants and animals, weather and climate, everything works out to the North American setting for the Book of Mormon, and the time frames work out with the populations who are here, the Adena and the Hopo culture. If you want to learn more, go to bookofmormonevidence.org. If you want to continue to watch our podcast, we encourage that. It helps us. Also, if you will subscribe. So while you're thinking about it right now, go ahead and punch the subscribe button right there. Okay, you can subscribe to our channel, and you'll get more of this awesome content. I rarely do these by myself, but this was something that I had done the research myself personally, and so I figured that I might as well be the one to do that. We have anyway. So this is some of the different things we have there. We have the Come Follow Me 2020, which was the Book of Mormon year 4 years ago on Come Follow Me. We followed the pretty well. I mean, we weren't 100% perfect about that, but we followed pretty much the church's which chapters to study each week and so forth as we went through that. And so that's our Come Follow Me. Which is no longer Come Follow Me 2020. We actually had to move all of that. We had, this is when we first got started, and we had like over 1.5 million, I think, views. And then we had to change it because it's no longer 2020. So we had to move it just to Come Follow Me, Book of Mormon Evidence. If you'd like to get more answers, there's Book of Mormon Answers. We have a new book coming out that's going to be really awesome. Hopefully in the next few months that will be on Book of Mormon Answers. And anyway, we've got fantastic things coming there. If you'd like to see some of the videos, this is the videos, the self-guided video tour and so forth that we do. And then of course, if you want to really get into this and see the full presentation, which is 2 hours long, I think we've been about 1.5 hours, so it's probably not much shorter, but basically that's that. You can go to Book of Mormon Evidence streaming and watch that if you're a subscriber to that. If you're not a subscriber, we highly recommend you do this. This is how we actually fund going forward what we're doing. We don't ask for donations from people to just donate to us. we want to give you something of value. And then if we offer something that's of enough value for you, then hopefully that you'll want to have that will want to support us. And the best way you can support us is actually by becoming a streaming website uh, member. So I know it's real expensive. It's $7.97 a month, but basically it's about the price of a burger nowadays per month, and that's on a yearly basis. And then you have access to over 1,700 presentations. It's Faithful Answers to Latter-day Questions is kind of what it looks like. We're going to be updating the website here in the next few months, so you'll see some major changes. It should look more like Netflix and Disney Plus and all those other things. And also we're working on a Hulu channel. Anyway, so a lot of things going on. Or excuse me, not Hulu, Roku channel. And of course, if you want to get all this information for the first time ever, all put together into one book. We can't go into a lot of depth and detail, but there's a lot of information that's in there. It's the first ever annotated edition of the Book of Mormon, which is the first ever red letter edition. It has all of this heartland of 265 pages of this heartland information and research that gives you further depth of understanding and information as far as your study of the Book of Mormon. Wow, that was a long one. Okay, so just to finish up, I just want to essentially, as I did this research, when I began the research, I didn't know how you would ever explain these things. I mean, how do you explain 3 days of darkness coming from an earthquake? Or why can't people build a fire if they have dry wood and they're professional fire builders? Their life depends upon their ability to build a fire. I didn't know the answer to these things when we first started, but I can tell you that I just know that the Book of Mormon is true. It is an actual history of real people, places, and events. The history of the Book of Mormon is critically important to its authenticity. If it's not a real history of real people and places, then it was basically an inspired fiction. And unfortunately, I know that there's even members of the church, even professors, even at BYU, who believe that the Book of Mormon isn't an actual history, that it's actually inspired fiction, that Joseph Smith received revelation and basically just wrote the book with all this really good doctrinal stuff in it. But that's not what he said. He said it was a real history, and he named people, and he met with some of the prophets of the Book of Mormon. So it is a real history. The evidence is important for many people. Some people say, I don't need the evidence. I'm good. But I can tell you that people who have gone on my tours and seen the evidence for themselves, even though they have strong testimonies of the Book of Mormon, it has strengthened their testimony of the Book of Mormon when they can see that this is real. This is not fake. This is not a story tale. This is a history. Nephi, Moroni, Benadi, they were all real people. They all lived here in North America. And so hopefully as you continue to study this information research, you're going to get more excited about this and really delve and dig into and read the Book of Mormon like never before. That's our hope. And I want to thank you for taking your time to go through this with me. Hopefully it's answered a lot of questions. And if you have further questions, don't hesitate to put them in the comments. I know I haven't been very good about keeping up with the comments. It's hard to keep up with everything, but I will do my best to do that. We have a team of people who also help me with that. So hopefully we'll be able to get to your comments. But yeah, leave some comments. If you like what you're seeing, you like to have more, you want to have 1,700 presentations from experts in, on every field of the Book of Mormon with over 450 different, experts, then subscribe to Book of Mormon Evidence streaming. Thanks everybody. I hope you're having a great day and God bless.